So welcome to the webinar on data sovereignty. I know we did have Gordon scheduled to do this presentation, but we've got Michael Jabonka in here to help us. Michael is a business development manager here at RNG Technologies and brings a lot of experience to the table on this topic. So we wanted to bring him in. Like we've done in our previous webinars, we'll leave the Q&A to the end. So I'll facilitate the Q&A with Michael after the 15 or 20 minute debrief. So please feel free to ask questions in the chat pane. I'll compile them and we'll ask them at the end. Righty, over to you, Michael.
Well, first of all, welcome everyone. As Ross said, I am in a business development role here at RNG, and I've actually joined them very recently. I came from rainy Melbourne, and I've started with RNG last Monday actually. So yeah, so having sunshine at this time of the year is a welcome change. In my 15 years experience in the IT field, I've sort of always worked with enterprise customers around the not-for-profit industry. So I've worked with the likes of some of the larger ones in Victoria. We've got Family Services comes to mind, Scope and another couple that come to mind. But one of the things that really stands out to me is that not-for-profit industry is an industry that probably has some of the more demanding service delivery aspects out of any of the industries. You probably have some of the least funding to fund the IT systems to support that. And then data sovereignty obviously is an issue that affects all that, because it affects one of the technologies that became really popular in the not-for-profit industry, which is cloud computing. So today's presentation is basically around the issues of data sovereignty and how it affects, well, perhaps some of your systems and perhaps some of your ideas or plans. Now this really is designed to provide you a non-legal, so I'm not a lawyer, just my interpretation, my experience of the topic. But caveat is go and speak to your lawyers if you have any questions. There will be a few links in this presentation too, so there's some legal documents as well. But again, I'm probably not a source of authority on those. But anyways, let's get started. Let's go through this. So, like I said, the agenda today is, I'd like to take you through what data sovereignty is, so the definitions of it, the background on it, and some of the legal challenges around it. Introduce the Australian privacy principles, which is effectively, guiding policies around privacy of data in Australia. What you can do to protect yourself, what are some of the consequences of perhaps not doing it. And we'll have a look at the cloud providers and see if ask the question, well, did it comply? And then I thought, give a little bit of value, speak about some of the common implications for us in the field, and perhaps how does data sovereignty affect those, and then obviously introduce us for those of you who haven't worked with us before, and go through questions and answers at the end. So data sovereignty. I sort of understood the topic, but when Ross asked me to run this webinar, I was really struggling to put it into words, so I actually jumped onto words.com and got that definition. I thought that was pretty clever. It's basically the concept that information which has been created, stored in digital form, is subject to the laws of the country in which it is located. So what that means is that if we produce information in Australia, obviously it's not a problem as long as it stays in Australia because it has to comply by local laws. But in today's day and age, that doesn't mean that necessarily stays in Australia, right? So the background in it is data sovereignty was always around. Back in the day, it was never an issue because data really wasn't important, right? With the introduction of digital data, we've changed the way data works or information works. It is all of a sudden very easy to work with. So it's very easy to create data and duplicate it. I've seen a statistic something along the lines of this year alone will create more data than we've created in the past 800 years or whatever it was. I can't really remember the details, but I suppose the takeaway is we create a staggering amount of data as humanity in this day and age. The other thing is it is extremely portable in today's connected is a big aspect of it. And digital data is also a source of blurred lines and management headaches. And what I mean by that is, if you look at the data that you're storing as a company internally, a lot of the data is a case of, you ask yourself the question: is it really core data, or is it non-core? And even if you identify core data from non-core data, quite often it is an impossible process to set up automated policies on an ongoing basis to segregate that core from non-core. So basically, a lot of businesses make the decision of saying, you know what, we'll just treat all our data uniformly and have the same set of policies for all of that data, rather than spend the effort to try to segregate it. Yeah, and obviously, as you can probably already see, that produces a lot of problems associated with storing the data, capturing it, and managing it, which in turn means that there's a lot of creative and innovative companies and people out there who obviously realise that there's problems and try to come up with solutions to those. And that's basically agree with cloud service providers have come from. They've realised there's a problem and they're trying to address it. So we get onto the legal skill, and again, I'm no lawyer, so I think I've got it right, but please confirm with your official, educated people, not a sales guy. So as I understand it, the legal challenge comes from the fact that each country has a set of information privacy laws, and this differ by countries. So if you do a Google search by privacy rankings by country, you'll actually notice that Australia is sort of middle of the pack, but places like China, in Southeast Asia, they're basically negative on that scale rather than positive. So, so I suppose the big question is, so me as an Australian citizen buying services from an Australian organisation, what sort of trust do I have that they will do the right thing with my data? So in other words, it's not being sold to data mining companies internationally or being used, I don't know, for example, credit card information. But the thing I suppose in the not-for-profit industry that's more relevant is, patient data or personal data of the nature of, what medication do I take, how often do I take it, do I have any disabilities, what are they, and so on. Okay. So basically the answer to that is we've got to trust the government that they do the right thing in policing that, and I suppose the government in turn is saying, well, we've got this thing called the Australian Principles Policy, Australian Privacy Policies, and that's the guiding lines around, how we're going to treat private data in Australia. So there is a quotation that you put at the bottom of the page. Now, it basically takes an extract out of the APP from Chapter 8, which is the chapter that basically directly affects data sovereignty. And it says, before an APP entity discloses personal information to an overseas recipient, the entity must take reasonable steps to ensure that the overseas recipient does not breach the APPs in relation to the information. So basically what it's saying is, before you take any personal information and put it in the state of your cloud service provider, you're responsible for making sure that information complies to APPs. Okay. Now that we understand that, like I said, there will be a slide with a link to the APPs. Pass it to your IT people, to your legal people, let them have a look through it. There's interesting reads in there. The site also provides some guidelines and sort of cheat sheets to do, I suppose, summaries of the APPs, because it's a big document, obviously. But I suppose the big thing was that, Chapter 8 of the APP was changed in March this year, and basically as of March this year, the whole cloud industry sort of got put on its head, okay? Because basically any of the big cloud providers, all of a sudden, there was a question: are they compliant, or am I exposing myself from a business operations risk? So, how do you protect yourself? Well, the government actually gives you a cheat sheet on that as well, and to say, the easiest way to protect yourself is to ensure that your partner or contractor has a contractual agreement with you to take on the components of the APPs. Okay, that sounds easy. in reality, you're not going to get it done very easily. I mean, let's think about somebody like Google Apps. Okay, first of all, you're not going to get access to the legal department of Google Apps to change their contracts, development contracts. These are companies that are headquartered out of the US. The US has a totally different set of privacy policies. Some of them actually comply with the APPs, but doesn't necessarily mean that they will comply with all of them. And the other matter of fact is, that the US marketplace, the Asian marketplace, the European marketplace are much bigger marketplaces than the Australian one. So, again, are they going to take their business flipped on its side and upside down in order to serve a small marketplace, particularly around, legislative sort of, requirement? Probably not. It means risking all of the other businesses. And by risking, I mean, obviously the costs associated with not being able to go and source the lowest cost, infrastructure to use for their cloud platform, which obviously one of the driving concepts we have cloud is, the cost reduction that we get with those technologies. So you can see how that, even though the government thinks it's a simple process, that basically says, what, you're ultimately responsible. You can try to pass that responsibility onto your cloud providers, but at the end of the day, you're responsible. So, some of the consequences, I'll start with the bottom. There was an article in the Australian on the 25th of July, which basically went to say that the owner of OPSM lost a $33.5 million contract with the Department of Defence because they were using cloud technology and storing some of their data, in international data centres. I don't know the exact details of which technology or which cloud provider was being used, but it gives you an example that that basically in March and July, a lot of government agencies and government-funded bodies have taken steps to assess their partners and say, okay, we've got a risk here, we've got to cover ourselves. What are you doing about it? Now, the government, as a consequence, the government will hold you accountable for any breaches. Okay, so in other words, they will come chasing you, and it's up to you to say that you will take reasonable steps to ensure that it was compliant. Through contractual arrangements. Government departments, agencies, and fund recipients will shy away from doing business with anyone that it doesn't seem to be taken that seriously. So in other words, it could be a loss of revenue for your business or loss of funding for not-for-profits. If the government sees you as a risk, okay, and if you can't satisfy audits, they'll perhaps lean that funding towards other companies or other organisations that have passed the audit. Now, having a look at some of the common ones, okay, where is your data residing? Now, I can tell you for a fact that the Australian companies like MYOB, Xero, Connecting Up, Infrastructure as a Service, which we run behind the scenes, they're all Australian-based. We don't replicate the overseas data centres and so on. Now, the interesting one there is the Amazon Web Services. It's actually a US-based company. What makes them different is that they have a total region. I'm not sure, for those of you that will be familiar with how AWS works, you'll understand that. They have a region set up to be limited just to Australia, which means they've got primary and secondary data centers in Australia, and which means that unless you specifically ask for it to be replicated somewhere else in the world to another region, it will all be replicated in Australia. Okay? So that basically means that they comply with the APPs because no data ever leaves offshore unless you specifically ask for it to leave. Then we get into the overseas ones. There's Microsoft Office 365, and I've got an asterisk next to it. Technically, the data center is in Singapore, right? But at the same time, I know that there's a lot of government entities, not-for-profits, government departments that are still signing up to Office 365. Okay, I've tried to find the information whether they've amended their terms of service to specify compliance to the APP. I wasn't able to find anything along those lines. My assumption is that they have amended their terms and that they comply. But again, please don't take my word for it because, like I said, I wasn't able to confirm it. I just know that in the marketplace there's a lot of government entities signing up to Office 365 still. Google Apps, overseas based, they don't have anything to my knowledge. my manager don't even know what an APP is. Salesforce, same thing. I mean, data going overseas, is it compliant? Don't know. You obviously should ask. Are they going to work with you to make sure that they're compliant? Don't know. It's a question between you and them, negotiation process. But my judgment would be unless you're an extremely big business in Australia, and that's a sizable business for them on a global scale, it probably would be a very small drop in a very big ocean. Microsoft Azure. Now it's funny that the Microsoft hosted Azure is obviously based in Singapore, but Azure is available as a platform for local partners to deploy themselves. We run a copy of it as well, and obviously ours being local, we get control over it, so I'll make sure it doesn't replicate. And the one that I think was the biggest issue for not-for-profits being Dropbox. That effectively is probably the big one because it allows collaboration, which in most cases not-for-profits really crave. That's basically, if you're just throwing procedural documents, policies and so on, you're probably not breaching anything. But if anyone decides to stop anything that relates to personal data of any of your patients or service providers or service recipients, then you're in serious breach. Now, like I said, the Dropbox problem, I've sort of already went through that. It's a very disruptive technology. It's very good for what it was. Unfortunately, as of March this year, it is a big problem. It's a big legal problem. From an IT perspective, it always was a problem, and because you couldn't really police it, right? So it was sort of sidestepping IT. So IT couldn't apply its rules and data store policies and the data retention and so on. Now, I'm not sure. It depends on the companies. I mean, I've seen IT departments that basically just threw their hands up in the air and said, you know what, there's no way we can control it. It's such a popular technology. We'll just pretend we don't know the problem exists. Through to IT departments that specifically blocked use of Dropbox before even the legislation changed, just because it didn't control what was done with it and how it was used in the company. The other one that I think is very topical to some not-for-profits, again, depends on the service that you're delivering, but there's a legislative requirement to keep data, and different types of data will have a different retention period specified. So obviously, for taxation reasons, there's a typical 7-year data retention period. Now, I have worked with not-for-profits that had legislative requirement to keep data for the life of the patient. Now, when you think about it, when you stop and think about that, you say, well, okay, we can back up the data, right? But in 4 years' time, how are we going to read that data, provided a machine that it's backed up correctly and the data is still sort of workable? How are we going to restore it? Because the technology we used 4 years ago, it's not around anymore, okay? Let alone 20 years ago, okay? So now you're starting probably thinking ahead, well, cloud makes perfect sense for other kind of data. You're guaranteed some of the validity of your data, and this is stored its native format, not relying on other technologies. You can always get it back when required. The other issue that is really common with not-for-profits is the service delivery spread that they are asked to perform. So obviously, they're all funded by the governments. Governments sort of, make sure that the service delivery is seen to be uniform to all areas of states or regions. So obviously, with the need to deliver uniform level of service to all of the catchment area, and you end up with a lot of small offices, offices of below 10 people. Now, obviously, you can't go out and invest in the level of IT infrastructure in buildings of 10 people just to ensure that they have the same systems and processes, and so on that the head office does. So again, cloud makes a lot of sense in this scenarios, because you're basically centralizing your systems and applications in the cloud, delivering it to the people as a ways of remotely accessing it. That way you can deliver the same platform, delivering your services to anyone. Or if you want one-man office in the middle of absolutely nowhere, or your head office staff, or 40 or 100 staff, or whatever it is. Now, I've mentioned this before, cost implications. Obviously, we don't have a lot of money to spend on IT in not-for-profit, but at the same time, IT is very important to capturing the data we create and ensuring the quality of the services that you guys deliver to your service recipients. weekends, you know, there is always this pressure on costs. Cloud technologies align themselves very well to that problem area because they're usually seen as a cheaper, you know, using the cloud to scale it. I won't go into the last two. I think they're self-explanatory, but you know, I think that everyone, from my experience, sort of wishes they had more collaboration and wishes they had client management systems because of the breadth of services that are delivered. They usually end up with a wide array of different systems that have information into. Just getting it a little bit smarter. Again, conceptualizing the systems and start creating very clear sort of interfaces between those systems and doing that. So that brings us on to, you know, who we are and what we do. Again, keep in mind I've only been here for a week, but you know, it seemed like a really good company in that week. We are an award-winning IT consultancy. We've got offices throughout the eastern border and then Brisbane, Sydney and Melbourne. We do deliver services Australia-wide from a network of contractors and partners, but also a lot of the work that we do on IT nowadays is remote work. Now, I think what differentiates us is that we do have a fairly large focus on organisations. There's some logos and some ones that we work on a day-to-day basis, and we are single supplier to those ones that are listed there. And you know, little known fact, simply large known fact, we actually are the connecting up infrastructure as a service provider. So it's actually our data centers that that sits in. So there you go. Data sovereignty. We know about it because we had to get certified for it as well. So I suppose that brings me to the end. Do you guys have any questions? You know, that I could shed some light on.
Thanks, Michael. Yep, we've got Q&A now. So if you have some questions, please pop them in the chat pane. We'll start with a question from Peter. Michael, do you see the driver for compliance being commercial relations such as OPSM's partner in that matter that you referenced earlier, as opposed to concern as to prosecution by the government department?
I think that you know, that's a very good question. First of all, you know, who's responsible, and you know, that's why lawyers make a lot of money, right? they could have a field day with it. So am I the best on defense of it? Probably not. You know, the APP states that ultimately, you know, the Department of Governance was the one in that particular situation, and the Department of Defence was the one that executed the contract with the provider. It was therefore on them to make sure the department was compliant. Okay. Now, what they could have done in that case is they could have made, you know, basically when the act was changed, they could have went back to the department and said, hey, we need to become compliant with that. The department could have got, okay, great, let us just go through the audit process and have that come in July and said, you know what, because of how business works, we can't guarantee compliance with it. And that's where, I mean, the defense, the Department of Defense would have probably been around and said, well, we've got no choice. The bigger risk for us to know about the fact that you want to continue running with you, we're going to have to pull the contract with somebody else. But that's personally my guess as to what happened. Okay, but again, you know, as to the exposure and how things actually went, I don't know enough about that particular case, and you know, I don't know whatever that went over. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Alrighty, thanks, Michael. One more question. What from Jenny? What's the out of everything? What's the most important thing to consider when we're talking about data sovereignty?
So I suppose that the key takeaway from this whole presentation is, you know, it's it's something that you need to be aware of, because there will be a lot of people who, effectively, I mean, I work in sales, right? My job is to make money for the company that I work for. Quite a lot of times in the field of IT, you don't really understand absolutely everything. It's a little bit like medicine, You start off on a topic, and then as you delve in, you've got different specialists, right? So you've got the general practitioners, and then you've got the guy who fixes your knee, you've got the guy who fixes your heart and soul does, you've got the guy who puts up the brain. Basically, there's a lot of companies on IT who are generalists, right? There's not so many specialists because until you get into the larger spaces of the government space, they will have a lot of specialist companies that will just the security or that will just the user interface, But I suppose at the lower end of the market, you really are relying on the generalist IT providers, such as ourselves, to do the right thing and have an understanding of the implication of what they're saying and recommending to you. But with the ABP changes, ultimately, that is going to be our responsibility to make sure that we go through the process and ask those questions. So it's probably something that's good to know about. You really need to worry about making sure that that you design your systems right and you design your solutions right. Now you can probably involve a computer service provider, such as AMG, and invest in that, then ultimately we can make sure that you can find us.
Cool. Thanks, Michael. Well, that's all the questions that we have for today. Again, thanks everyone for tuning in for this quick debrief. It was designed to, give you a bit of extra insight into the data sovereignty issues that are going to be facing your organization. If you do have any questions for Michael, his contact details are there in the email. His email, michaelj@rgtech.com.au. You'll also have a follow-up email from me in the next day or so, which will include a recording and a full copy of the slides. So if you wanted to share that around the office to your colleagues or people that are interested, feel free to do so. And we'll have another webinar scheduled in a couple of weeks, so keep an eye out for that email as well. Alrighty, thanks again for joining us. Thanks, Michael.